Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Emily from the Miami University Alumni Association. We are excited to kick off today's session led by Miami alumna and productivity expert Elisabeth Galperin, class of 2000. As the owner of Peak Productivity, Elisabeth helps leaders and teams transform the way they communicate for better collaboration and stronger results. So thank you for joining us today, Elisabeth.
Great to be here.
Today, she will guide us through practical strategies for running effective meetings, improving follow-through, and building a culture of action. You'll also explore ways to streamline written communication, reduce digital clutter, and communicate with greater clarity and impact. Before we get started, just a reminder to our live viewers that you can use the Ask a Question button below the video to ask questions or share comments. There are actually a few times that Elisabeth will ask you for answers or takeaways. So please use this button to share, and then I will share your comments with Elisabeth. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Elisabeth. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. It's great to be here. Great to see everyone. I actually got to be up on campus about a week and a half ago. So I love staying plugged into Miami. Luckily, I live in Cincinnati, so I can get up there rather often. But I'm really excited to be able to share this content with you all today. I've been teaching and coaching and training on productivity and communication for 17 years now. So happy to be here and to spend the next hour with you talking through our content. So I'm going to go ahead and get our slide deck rolling. Okay, so our topic today is the art of productive meetings and email. And I want to actually have everyone start off by dropping in the chat, if you're able, an answer to this question. Why do efficient meetings and emails matter to you? What's your why for being here today? And as these answers come in, I will share with you why I think it's important and why I'm having you share that from the get-go. I believe that this is crucial to professionals at all ages and stages because meetings have a significant impact on our time, on our relationships, and on the quality of our work. And so clearly, it has a strong impact on our productivity. My mission in my work is to help individuals achieve peak productivity, both in their personal and their professional lives. And so this is one way that I can help in maybe a small way or maybe a big way to all of you. As you're answering, the reason I have you answer that question is I want this to kind of guide you. So the answer you just put in there, I want to make sure that as I'm sharing strategies and solutions, that you're seeing how they connect to your why, perhaps to your challenge, and you're starting to find some good, solid strategy that you can immediately implement. Okay, so one more little self-assessment that I want you to do. So again, grab a piece of paper, grab your tablet, and answer these questions to yourself. You don't have to answer these in the chat. But on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective are the majority of the meetings that you lead and or attend? And if you want to make those two different categories, that's perfectly fine. So scale of 1 being a waste of time, 5 highly productive. Where would you say that currently the meetings that you're a participant in or a leader of, where do they fall? And then if they're not a 5, what's the biggest frustration with meetings that you currently have, or maybe that you've heard from your team or your colleagues? So jot that down. Again, be clear on the greatest frustration. That's going to help with the solutions. Okay, how often do the meetings that you attend have a clear agenda that is sent or shared in advance? So 10%, 90%, somewhere in the middle. Does your company, your organization, whether you're a team of 2 or 200 or 2,000 or larger, does your company have defined best practices for meeting management? Is there a playbook of some sort? Are there guidelines, protocols, templates? And then lastly, does your company have defined best practices for written communication and how you are intended to use the multiple tools and channels for communication? So what I mean there is, what's the purpose of email versus Teams chat versus text messages? Maybe you have another tool like Slack or Asana that's a task management tool that you can communicate within. Does your company define and differentiate how to use those tools? Okay, so your answers as you write those down or think those through, these are going to help identify what information from today's training will be most impactful to the challenges that you identified and to the current state of your organization. Okay, so meeting mindset. So I said I've been in this industry for 17 years, and what I have found is really there's three main mindsets when it comes to meetings. You've got the haters, the folks that just despise the thought of a meeting and resist it and try to find any possible way to get out of a meeting. And that may be some of you. This is a judgment-free zone. So that may be a percentage of our population here today. We also then, on the other end of the spectrum, have the enthusiasts. I'm an enthusiast. I love meetings. I love the social aspect. I love the collaborative aspect. I like that it gives variety in my day. And then we also, and some of you may be there with me, probably a smaller percentage. I think the majority of us are acceptors. It's just part of the process. I just got to get through it, function over form. It is what it is. And we walk into those meetings with the idea of, I just want to get in and get out and get back to work. So take a minute to think about where do you fall? And then I want you to now think a little bit about why the mindset is important. Attitude shapes action, right? This quote says, a positive attitude leads to positive action. Your mindset really does determine outcomes. And so when you walk into a meeting, when you literally walk through that doorway, if you have optimism, you're going to find opportunity. You're going to be more open-minded and curious and engaged. If you walk in with that negative mindset, you're looking for obstacles, you're looking for problems. You're probably, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, potentially shutting yourself down or others down. So I challenge you today to be willing to transform your perspective, maybe move a little bit towards the enthusiast on that scale. And remember that small shifts in how you think can create powerful change in what you achieve. All right, so I'll provide a couple of laughs here. I like to just throw in some funny memes because we all love them and we all can relate to them. We know that meetings in real life can often create so much energy, frenetic energy leading up to and following the meeting, that oftentimes we have this tiny little percentage of the triangle of the pie to actually do the work that come out of meetings. So that can be a big challenge. And then we layer on top of that the video calls, and how it adds an additional layer of challenge, awkwardness, potentially technology challenges. And so there are a lot of obstacles just in the nature of meetings. There's also just who doesn't love a great icebreaker? Well, there's a lot of us who don't love icebreakers. And I show this meme to remind you as leaders and as participants in meetings that we really need to be mindful and plan for the different communication styles and preferences that are in the room. And to make sure that we're planning a meeting based on purpose, and that we're throwing in activities like this when the purpose might be relationship building, but that we're, again, being very mindful of who's in the room and what people are looking to get out of our meeting. And then, of course, we have wonderful lack of etiquette with email. All of us have experienced being on the receiving end of reply alls and CCs and BCCs, or as a sender, and just being unsure of when we need to include all, when we don't. There's just so many unwritten rules. And then again, who has not experienced the phone call to follow up on an email, or an email to follow up on the phone call to follow up on the email? Lots of results here are communication overload. And so my goal today is to help us to streamline and refine and improve. Okay, so I'm a researcher. I love data, I love statistics, so I threw a couple of in here today. This comes from a 2024 study from Grammarly called the State of Business Communications Report. I can provide the URL if anyone is interested in combing through it more thoroughly. Here's what we know. 1,000 knowledge workers were surveyed. almost 250 of those being leaders. And we know that knowledge workers spend almost 88% of their work week communicating. So that is obviously a huge portion of our time. And so we've got to get it right. We've got to take time to be more strategic and more proactive. We know that poor communication can lead to a 40% decrease in productivity. 40%, that impacts revenue, that impacts employee happiness, it can impact retention, lots of trickle down impact there. And then we know that 84% of the leaders are communicating in more channels than ever before. So like I said earlier, it's not just a phone on the desk anymore, right? There are so many different places to look for, to use, to follow up, and it can really create some inefficiencies. So we're going to dive into how do we improve those inefficiencies. So the first portion today of what we're going to go through is crafting a productive meeting. Absolutely, we know that the more proactive and strategic we can be in all areas of business, the more we're going to reap the benefits. So these are the most common obstacles, and this is what we're going to address today in the next about 15 to 20 minutes as I go through this content on meetings. These are the obstacles that I hear most often from my clients, my trainees. You might have some other things you add to the list, but I think we can all align on these 6 common obstacles. Meetings have unclear purpose. They often lack or have no structure. There's limited engagement. We either have the people that dominate or we have too many people that don't get an opportunity to share and engage. Time mismanagement, the meetings that run too long, that don't have time breakdowns, and so one topic dominates the entire meeting. Meetings that end with a lack of decisions, and then poor follow-up. So let's dive in to how we're going to solve those common obstacles. So I like to think of a meeting trifecta here. There are 3 key segments to meetings, and this can apply to one-to-ones, to weekly meetings, to quarterly, strategic, annual planning meetings. Simply put, we can look at it in 3 segments, and if we address these 3 segments and we get the foundational parts of this right, we can create a cycle of progress. We can get the flywheel spinning. And so the first component, none of this is brand new knowledge to you, but the first segment or phase is where we're preparing and planning. The second is where we're going to actually meet and engage and have the dialogue. And then the third phase, which in my opinion is probably the most critical, is identifying the action to be taken and following, tracking the progress in between one meeting to the next. So let's dive in. So phase 1, pre-meeting preparation. As it says here, I can't say it any better. Successful meetings begin long before anyone enters the room. All right, so what is most important? The fundamental steps for pre-meeting preparation. Largely, this is the responsibility of the meeting coordinator, whoever is in charge of the meeting. However, there are certain questions you can ask and little hints and nudges that you can make if you are a participant to try to pull some of this information out if the leader is not doing this proactively themselves. So key here is defining and documenting the purpose or the specific outcomes of a meeting. It answers the question, why are we here? Simple as that, but how many meetings do we walk into and think, not really sure what we're going to talk about today? The second most important fundamental here is identifying a meeting format or type. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide, so hold your questions on that for a minute. Next, making sure that we have a focused agenda that includes time allocations. So we do need to limit how many things we're talking about, but we also need to make sure that we are partitioning out the 60 minutes or the 30 minutes that we have to make sure we're keeping our pace and our flow. Making sure that we're inviting essential participants. And I define essential participants as individuals that are going to contribute in a meaningful way. If someone is not engaging or participating, they can probably just get the cliff notes, right? Distributing any and all materials ahead of time. So those of us, raising my hand, that need to prepare, that want to read ahead of time, that need to formulate thoughts and ideas before getting into the room, those of us that process that way are prepared. And then setting the tone for distraction-free environment. We've all been there and we've all done this. I will be the first to admit, where we're in a meeting, but our brain and our eyes are somewhere else. They're on our phone, they're in our inbox. They're not, we're not where our feet are. I don't know if you've heard that saying, but be where your feet are. We're not truly present. So how do we do that? Maybe it's leaving cell phones in a basket outside the conference meeting. Maybe it's closed laptops and only one individual is doing the note taking. Doors closed, blinds closed, whatever it needs to be to create the environment that's going to enhance collaboration and engagement. Okay, so I referenced earlier the concept of meeting types. This slide, the information here comes from a book by Patrick Lencioni. It is called Death by Meetings. And he defines 4 distinct types of meetings, each with a distinct or a specific purpose. And kind of the premise of the book is that most organizations are blending all types of discussions into long, unfocused meetings, which leads to frustration and inefficiency, and then we don't want to come back for more, right? So I'm going to briefly go through these. What I want you to think about is, in your position and within your team, within your organization, how would you customize these? You might add a 5th, or you might take one out for the role that you fill. But think about how these can apply and also be customized to your organization. So the daily check-in, this is a quick tactical meeting, all right? The purpose is rapid fire updates on key priorities. It might happen at the very beginning of every day, or the very end of every day, or every shift. It really should be frequent, so more than once a week. And the focus is what's happening today, and are there any roadblocks? So brief stand-up, a huddle, whatever you might call it. The benefit is it eliminates unnecessary emails and keeps the team aligned. The second type is what he calls weekly tactical. These might be longer, somewhere in the hour to hour and a half. This is execution focused. This is where we problem solve. So the purpose of a meeting like this is discuss current priorities, discuss current metrics, discuss, again, any obstacle that maybe takes a little bit more discussion and dialogue. This is likely a weekly meeting. The focus of these meetings: immediate challenges, project updates, and short-term execution. So it could be a weekly finance team meeting, or a weekly LT, leadership team meeting. And the benefit here is it's keeping the team proactive, a little bit out ahead, and prevents wasted time in the daily back and forth conversations that might be running in 5 or 10 different inboxes. The third type is what he calls the monthly strategic meeting. These are longer. These could be a half day or at least 2 hours. And this is where the team is doing more big picture thinking and bigger problem solving. And so our purpose here is taking a deep dive into longer term challenges, opportunities that need to be vetted, and really digging a little bit more into strategy. And so a meeting might be focused on market trends or process improvement or innovation. So it allows the team members to get out of the day-to-day grind and to really enable groupthink, right? And real innovation and proactivity. And then the fourth type would be the quarterlies. This is where the team is leaving the office, getting into a new environment, working on vision, working on culture building, long-term planning, like 3 years, 5 years visioning. So higher level strategic alignment is why we have these meetings. Leadership development, again, they can be quarterly, annually. One of the outcomes and objectives is indeed team bonding, leadership growth, and then yes, setting vision for the future of the organization. And the real benefit of these is strengthening team cohesion and company vision. So again, think a little bit on how would you customize this to your team or your organization, but Being able to differentiate the type is what's most important there. Okay, so we talked about the preparation and the planning and differentiating the type of meeting, stating the purpose. So now we're in the meeting. We're walking through the door into the conference room with our positive mindset and attitude. This is how we as leaders, and again, as individual contributors, can create an engaging meeting structure. Defining roles. Every individual in that meeting, some might be hybrid and virtual, some might be in the room. Everyone needs to know, what is my role here? Am I the facilitator? Am I in charge of note taking? Am I the timekeeper? Am I in charge of tech? Am I a devil's advocate? Am I here to give my opinion? Am I here to provide facts and research? Making sure that there's a role for everyone. Of course, making it interactive, but how do we do that? This is, again, where it's really key to understand communication styles of the group, knowing who is a fast thinker, who takes time to process, who's quiet, who maybe wants to engage in a small one-person conversation, then bring it back to the group. So really paying attention to how can we make sure everyone is interacting in a way that is comfortable to them. Driving discussion and dialogue. I often hear from meeting participants that they feel like they get shut down, that they're not really there to actually share their opinion, that they feel that they're there to just listen and nod their head. So again, depending on the meeting purpose, making sure that everyone in the room understands, are we here to make a decision? Are we here to decide on taking action? Are we here to just wrestle with a problem and come up with brainstorming ideas, but not move anywhere with it yet? So, any meeting that's just a status update can be a memo, right? Can be an email. And so driving discussion and dialogue. And then as we're driving that discussion, is it a safe place? Is there that psychological safety that people feel like they can disagree, provide an opposing opinion, engage in some back and forth, healthy debate or healthy conflict, as you might call that? Is there a way to respectfully disagree with one another? This takes really strong leadership, right? It takes really important to have a high EQ. This takes practice, absolutely. Patrick Lencioni has another book that's called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team that is a great read if you're trying to figure out how to create, or I should say, how to navigate and encourage healthy conflict. But meetings are where we should be able to engage and embrace debate and diverse opinions. So these are things that we want to make sure we're finding opportunity in creating the time and space for that type of conversation. Okay, phase 3. So we had the prep and the planning, we got into the meeting, we had some really healthy discussion. Step 3, where the rubber meets the road. How are we aligning on the action to be taken? And how are we going to make sure that we're measuring progress? Because we know who owns the actions. So accountability is one of my favorite words. And I know a lot of people often think it feels like micromanagement, but if it's done well, then it can be the linchpin. So what we're doing here is we're thinking about, at the end of a meeting, are we clear on action items? Have we verbally aloud said, these are the 5 things that our team needs to do before we meet again? This is who owns the first task. This is who owns the second task. And everyone's aligned with that. Not just verbally, but then we document it. We put it in a spreadsheet. We perhaps have a task management tool that we can upload these tasks to. We have the summary notes that are made accessible to all who attended and to those who may have had to miss. And then we have an understanding and an agreement that we're tracking progress in between those meetings, and not tracking through email follow-ups, but using these tools, using these other channels to demonstrate that you completed your task or you've handed something off to the next person. So there's some real-time updates and there's visibility. That peer pressure of accountability can be very positive in a cohesive work team. And then making sure, particularly if you're the leader, that you are building a results-driven culture, that you're celebrating the progress, that you're giving visibility when people complete their work or go above and beyond. Really making sure that you're encouraging the results and getting to the results. And maybe even if a mistake is made or a failure happens, turning that into a learning opportunity. I don't know if you're familiar with the acronym for FAIL, which is first attempt in learning. But part of building a culture like this is the safety to make a mistake, the safety to drop the ball, but to know that the team is there to help you pick it up and move it forward. So this is what happens, when no one's looking, right, outside of the meeting. But this is so critical that as a team, we're all making sure that the momentum is building. There isn't finger pointing of, well, it wasn't my job. No, it's everyone's job to ensure there's accountability and follow through and progress. Okay, so I'm going to show with you now a very easy way to kind of package this together, and it's called the PALIS method. And so you'll see it's an acronym, and you'll see that in these 6 stages, we're really looking for everything that I just mentioned in those 3 phases or the cycle of meeting progress. So often, if you look this method up, you'll see that it is spoken about as a way to evaluate meetings. I like to use it both as a preparation or planning tool and also as an evaluation tool. So I won't go too in depth because you all can read this, but the P is about the purpose. Was the meeting purposeful? The purpose is driven by clear objectives. Agenda driven and audience. So was there an agenda? And was the right audience, is the right audience invited? Was the right audience there? I'm going to share a quick story with you on the no agenda, no attenda. I was facilitating a training up at University of Dayton, actually, and one of my participants, we were talking about meetings, and he raised his hand and he said, we have a phenomenal motto in our organization about meetings. Can I share it? I said, of course, we'd love to learn from you. And he said, well, in our organization, our motto is no agenda, no attenda. And everybody kind of laughed. And I said, well, tell us more about that. And he said, well, if you are the organizer of the meeting and you do not issue an agenda and distribute an agenda, I think it was like 1 day or 12 hours before the meeting, then anyone that's on that invite list has the right to not attend because they were not given enough information to inform them why their presence was needed. And he said, it's great. We can kind of joke about it. It's a fun little catchy phrase, but everybody understands their responsibility and it creates immediate accountability. So I don't know if your organization could get behind something as kind of cutthroat as that, but it's a great motto, right? Do the prep work or else don't expect people to be there. So the next component of the PALIS method is, are there limitations? Are you limiting the length of the meeting? Are you limiting the topics to be covered? Are you limiting, how many different opinions or how long are we going to go back and forth? Something else to think about here with limitations. I have another organization, they're about 400 employees, and their meetings are by default 25 minutes or 50 minutes in length. We cut the extra 5 or the extra 10, means we can't do the icebreakers quite often, but it allows just little gaps in people's calendars, and it really helps people to tighten up the meeting. So what are the limits that are going to help create efficiency? The A is action-oriented, right? Are we here and did we make decisions? Did we cover next steps and agree to them? Did we make sure that each next step is owned specifically by an individual or by a group of individuals? And so is there true action when you walk out of that meeting? Do you know what is coming next? The C is clear communication. Close the meeting strong, right? Doing exactly what I just said. Summarize, key takeaways, agreed upon next actions. Where are we documenting them? And then the E is making sure you're planning for, but then again, evaluating, did I make sure, did everyone get an opportunity to engage and to contribute? And it doesn't have to be in the same way, right? But someone might be there to learn. Okay, great. So their engagement might be giving you a debrief of what they learned from the conversation. So 2 additional tools that I want to mention here as we're closing out the meetings segment. There is a methodology that's called EOS. It's Entrepreneurial Operating System. And they have what are called level 10 meetings. And the simple explanation of that is when a meeting is ending, everyone in the meeting go around in the circle or whatever, the squares, and everyone ranks the meeting on a scale of 1 to 10. You don't give your whys and your whats and try to explain yourself. You just rate the meeting. 1, which is not effective, 10, which is highly effective. And as the leader, you just take that feedback, but everybody in the room is in a safe place and can say, I felt this meeting was a 6 or an 8 or a 2 or a 10, immediate feedback. So that's one way to really make sure that the Palace method is working. There's also some new AI that has come out recently that not only records and summarizes your meeting, but it will also provide some coaching tips. It will give percentages of the number of people who talked and who had the highest percentage of speaking, and it will actually evaluate your meeting effectiveness. So the one that I have seen, I've played around with it just a little bit. It's called Meeting Pro. So if you're interested in some more information on that, let's make sure we connect after today. All right, so key takeaways. My summary for you. Meetings don't have to be boring. If they have preparation, if we implement the strategy and we ensure follow through, we'll have high impact and high effectiveness. That Palace framework is a great way to self-check, but also group check. Think about implementing 1 or just a few small changes at a time. And then please track your progress, right? Feedback and input is so key. I don't know if you've heard the saying, but you can't read the label from inside the bottle. You might think you're running fabulous meetings. I actually had a sales leader who loved his weekly sales call meetings, but his sales reps were miserable. And so make sure you're getting feedback. All right, so in the chat, if you could drop or take a quick moment and share with us what's one key takeaway here? What's one aha? What's one new strategy or habit that you want to adopt or readopt that you gained from that segment? And then I'm going to take questions at the end, so you're welcome to drop them in as we go. I'm going to keep moving here and get us through the email and written communication section, and then we'll have some discussion. All right, so obviously of the 88% of our day, or excuse me, our week, that is communication focused. It's not all meetings, it's not all verbal. So written communication, of course, is a big piece of what we do, and I don't believe it will ever go away. So let me set the stage with the hidden cost of digital communication. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the author Cal Newport. He has a book, he has several books, one that's called A World Without Email. It's a great read, I'd highly recommend it. And what he has coined this phrase, and he calls it hyperactive hive mind. And what he's really saying here is that because of email and other written communication tools, we've created these work environments where we are in constant communication. We're constantly getting interrupted and distracted, and feeling like we have to be available and that we're needed. And this workflow really disrupts deep work, right? Most of you were hired because you have some zone of genius. And for you to be able to get into that creative space or that analytical space, you need to be able to go deep. You need to be able to put on your blinders and really focus. And unfortunately, the most work environments really prevent this. And so our focus gets disrupted. And when we're constantly switching between tasks and messages and a communication here and a quick conversation there, that's called context switching, and it's taxing our mental resources. Our brain is literally, pouring out energy. And at some point in the day, and sometimes it's by 10 a.m., we become less effective. We've reached a point of diminishing return. I just did a video on this on my LinkedIn channel about, we have to power through, but we don't have mental energy or resources left. And so it kind of creates this productivity paradox. We have millions of apps that can help us be the best version of ourselves and the most productive. And yet, because we have so many of these tools, it's really reducing our ability to complete meaningful work and meaningful tasks. The latest statistic is desk workers are interrupted or distracted every 2 to 3 minutes, and it can take us up to 23 minutes to recover, to get back into that thought process if we were in the middle of, an article that we're writing or a proposal that we're putting together. And so it's up to us, because technology is actually not going to help us. It's hindering us in a lot of ways. It's up to us to break that cycle. So how do we do that? So my first strategy here is to really think about the communication channels that on a daily basis that you are in and out of, that are requiring your attention, that you are using to get others' attention, and to really think about, can we differentiate these channels? Can email be for external communication and maybe Teams is for internal? So is there a way to create more definition around each tool so that they're serving you in different ways? We've all been there where I know that Emily sent me some information, but I don't know if it was in my email, if it was in the Teams chat, maybe she texted it to me. We spend so much time looking for information. Does your organization have protocol that could be anywhere from, hey, 24-hour response time, or no need for one-word thanks, no, and yes emails? So are there some things that the organization can declare as, hey, team, this is how we're all going to operate to create that clarity? And then, balancing politeness and verbal communication. It's much easier and quicker to do the thanks, you're welcomes, and that little back and forth banter that helps with relationships. On email and in other written forms, it becomes very wasteful. And so how can you, for yourself, but also leading others, how can you help define, I'm communicating professionally and I'm communicating with clarity, but I'm also able to be concise? So some more standardized workflows. How do we get ourselves out of some of these? An email is a blank slate, right? The Teams chat, it's a blank slate. So some suggestions here for how do we put some more structure around, especially communication that's redundant in a way. Can you replace unclear email chains with some structured workflow? Templates when you're gathering information, or tables when you're sharing information. Absolutely the shared task management and project management tools. I would say most organizations use those to about 20% of their full capacity. Almost every organization has one built in, whether you're an Outlook user or a Gmail user. Most likely it's free or very nominal fee, and can really help to eliminate the unstructured communication. Guidelines on the reply all, the CC, BCC, making sure that folks understand, why do I use it? When do I use it? When not to use it? Having those agreed upon response times or reply times, and not feeling pressure to perform above that expectation, right? They're there for a reason. They're there to give you some space. I love when organizations come up with, I call it a library of subject line starters, so that if I have all caps urgent, everybody in my organization knows this is a drop everything and read. But if I have a subject line that says FYI, get to it when you get to it. So is there a way to just in that one subject line communicate the intent and the priority level of communication? I had an organization, actually it was a team at Kroger, that had a collective time block. It was called their power hour. And internally, no one messaged each other for those 60 or 90 minutes. And so they knew that they weren't going to be ignoring or letting down a team member by not being open to their emails or having Teams open, it created a really great opportunity to get through some of the work before the new communication came in. Those are just a few ideas. Get creative, right? Think outside the box, but how can you create some more structure and protocols and workflows that get you out of the blank canvas of emails and text messages? Okay, so we're gonna spend the last about 10 minutes talking about how to know your audience. This actually applies both in in-person meetings and in written communication. I love DISC. If you're not familiar with DISC, it's a communication style assessment. If your organization has formally evaluated everyone, then this is great information that often gets lost, filed away in my professional development folder. If you don't have formal assessments, I got a great tool for you, but if you don't have formal assessments, just knowing the 4 primary communication styles or preferences, you can kind of read someone. Once you get to know them a little bit better, you most likely can kind of have a sense. We're not trying to put anyone in a box here. What we're trying to do is understand the preferences of others, how they compare or contrast to our own communication preferences, and to use that to create more efficiency and effectiveness when we're communicating. I'm going to use the DISC profiles here specifically around written communication, but again, you can apply it to verbal communication just as easily. Okay, so there's 4 primary types. Most of us have 2 that are higher than, 2 that kind of stand out. Some folks are extremely high in one and low in the other 3. It doesn't mean that you can't communicate in the other ways. It just, again, means your preference. So if you know your DISC profile, I'd love for you to drop it in the comments just so we kind of have a sense. I'm sure we've got great diversity in the group today. High dominance means that this is an individual who prefers direct communication. They're very results driven and they're very fast paced. So if you're communicating with a high D individual, you can be concise. You can cut out the fluff. You don't have to start with, hey, how was your weekend? Didn't you love the sunshine? Your communication can be very focused on, here's the results I'm looking for. Here's the actions I need you to take. Are we good? Using bullet points is great. If I have a client who's a high dominance, I have to stop writing in paragraphs, which is my preference, because I know that it won't get read. And again, you can avoid the excessive pleasantries. So cut the fluff and the small talk. Stick to the point. Don't worry about the extra politeness. This person doesn't need it and might actually be turned off by it. The next profile here or communication style here is influence. So these folks are driven by social opportunity. They're very people focused and relationship oriented. They're very expressive. All right, so we can see their emotions pretty easily, and they lean into their expressiveness and their emotions. So if you're communicating with a high I style, be as friendly and engaging as possible with your tone. Explain things with clarity, and it can still be concise. Weave in whenever possible how this is impacting the team or the opportunity to collaborate. So again, anything that you can show that, hey, this message that I'm sending you is impacting people or it's about building relationships, they're going to be all ears and all eyes. High I is still a pretty fast action taker and decision maker. So provide key details, don't overwhelm, and again, don't make it too lengthy. They don't need formality, but they need friendly. Avoid technical language that turns them off. And you got to keep it interesting and exciting and high energy. The dry tone you'll lose their interest and perhaps their engagement. Steadiness. So any of you that are an S on the DISC profile, you love being supportive. You lean into collaboration and you desire stability. So if you are communicating in writing or in verbalizations with folks who you would say, yeah, I can see that this is steady Eddie over here. Be warm, be reassuring, show appreciation. They may really like that email response that says, hey, Kevin, so appreciative that you were able to complete this project for me. They're not going to see that as fluff like a high D would. Okay, they like that appreciation. Make it conversational. So this is where I know that written communication is different than spoken, but you still can weave in some conversational components to your communication with folks. Make sure that you are demonstrating how this individual's input or opinion or actions they make a difference. They're meaningful. They're meaningful to the team. They contribute to the greater good of the organization or the project. And S's need time to process. So try not to send them those urgent, I needed this yesterday messages. Try not to be abrupt. Try to avoid rushed communication. If communication is urgent or rushed, this is where I would encourage you to try to have more of a verbal face-to-face conversation than sending it in text or email, because we lose some of that emotional intelligence and some of the meaningfulness. So be cautious of rushed communication with folks who are high S's. And then this C rounds us out. These are the conscientious folks. This is my highest profile, so I know this profile well. When you're communicating with folks who are high C, be clear, logical, and detailed. I don't mind 5 paragraphs. If there's really useful information in there and some facts, I will eat it up. Provide supporting data. So bullet points are fine, but I might need to know a little bit of where these bullet points came from. Structured formatting is great. Definitely a bit more of the traditional, start with your, quick little greeting and intro, go into the body and give me a conclusion. And conscientious folks really, really desire deadlines. So in your communication, if you say, as soon as you can or when it's convenient, that feels very unsettling to a high C. They don't know if that means you need it by the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month. So avoid that vague communication. Also be careful if a high I who's very emotional, if there's too much emotion, someone who's conscientious can get distracted by that and can sometimes read into it too much. Avoid missing details. And again, the conscientious and the steadiness, they do not work well under pressure. So if you can eliminate last minute requests, or if you can make those in more of a personal one-to-one ask than in writing, you're probably going to have a better relationship and a better communication opportunity with them than doing it through quick emails and text messages. Okay, so team communication best practices. Some of this is kind of a recap of what I just went through. Are you differentiating channels or separate platforms for, internal, external, or, this team versus that project group? Can you find opportunities to do more asynchronous communication? Recording a quick video that is an overview versus calling the meeting. And that means the more you can do asynchronous with updates and short little bits of information, it makes the synchronous, the in-person, in real-time meetings more impactful. Making sure that we've got some personal and professional boundaries in place, right? Is my personal text or cell number intended to be used for work messages? That's up to you and your team to decide, but are there some boundaries that are making everyone's communication preference at least accounted for and acknowledged? Response time, again, be very reasonable and have an agreement with your team members on what is a reasonable response. Aligning on urgent matters. If urgent is all caps in the subject line, or if I open your door and say it's urgent, have we already aligned on what that actually means? What qualifies as urgent? And then having some follow-up processes. What does happen when I don't get a reply within the 24 hours? What does happen when I see that a task is not moving forward? How do we handle lack of response or a lack of progress? These are all key things to talk about before the circumstance happens, right? Being proactive and deciding ahead of time how we're going to handle some of these common situations. Okay, so know your audience, right? Understand styles and preferences. It doesn't mean you have to always cater to others, but you've got to acknowledge and again, if you can share in the right way, you're going to get what you need. And it's not being manipulative, it's being relational, right? Be intentional and strategic, create those processes, those best practices. Be clear. Clarity, clarity, specificity. Every single one of the communication preference types needs clarity and desires specificity. And then ask for feedback. This is just another place where you might think you're a fabulous communicator. Make sure that you're getting some feedback, refining your own best practices and those of the organization routinely, right? I mean, with AI, your practices at the midpoint of 2024 might need to be drastically different than at the midpoint of 2025. Okay, so I'm going to take questions here in just a minute, but I just have a quick ask. Drop in the chat key takeaways on the communication and email effectiveness. And then I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. That QR code takes you straight to my LinkedIn profile. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I will send you a one-page kind of cheat sheet that summarizes all of this. So if you were eating lunch or on the road and you didn't get to take your notes, just send me a quick message and I will get you a cheat sheet that you can perhaps share with your organization. Would love to answer any questions right now and or offline. So if you have a question but you don't feel like it's relevant or you don't want to share it with the whole community, I'm happy to do a little troubleshooting with you one-to-one. So Emily, I'm going to turn it back to you and see what questions we might have.
Yeah, thank you so much. And is it okay if I remove your screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
So just to share, I wanted to share some of the comments that came in the beginning with your first questions. Do you want to remind people what that first question was?
The first question was like greatest obstacles to meetings, and right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So people put in the chat, I do not want to waste people's time, and I don't want to waste my time. Time is limited, and we want to make the best of it for ourselves and our coworkers. I hate meetings to prep for meetings.
Yes.
That's a good one. I want clear agreement on assignments, next step from the team. And then someone else said, as a new empty nester, I'm trying to get back into the workforce and want to be current and professional.
Yeah.
So that was some of the responses to the first one. So some of the questions that came in, let me get to that. I apologize. So when are ad hoc meetings without an agenda appropriate? Are they appropriate and when?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that again, knowing your team, knowing if something comes up that you could not prepare for, and you need to gather the troops, then of course gather the troops, right? You still can do a lot of these critical steps though, right? You can still make sure that you're inviting the smallest number of people you need to. And I would suggest, and I use a timer. This is called Timer. The Cincinnati-based company. I use timers in meetings. I would set a timer for the first 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and grab a whiteboard and say, hey, I'm calling an ad hoc meeting. Here's the objective. We've got 30 minutes or whatever, and let's quickly bullet out our agenda. So in advance is always best, but if it's not possible, carve out 2 to 3 minutes to build it in the moment. Absolutely, it will get you all on track, within those first couple of moments. So I think that, in advance is always best, but it doesn't mean you have to eliminate that step.
Perfect. Thank you. Somebody else asked, do you have just a really quick productive format for a one-on-one with your supervisees?
Ooh, great question. So, yes, and what I'll share before I kind of give you the template is I like to encourage leaders and managers to have the team member, the individual contributor, to create the agenda. Let them have some ownership. You might still add to it, but I think it's a really great way of sharing the load. As a manager, you might have 20 one-to-ones. Those individuals have one. And I always say, start with something good, right? Tell me a success, share 3 wins, whatever it may be, but start with a win. Then I would suggest going into, whatever the kind of the meat of the meeting is, or you're there to give feedback or you're there to get an update. And then I would say, discussing, making sure there's an opportunity to say, what do you need from me this week? Or, is there any obstacles that you're worried about, upcoming? So getting them to do a little forward thinking. So, a little bit of a review, tell me something good, share a win, a little bit of current status, and then a little bit of future thinking. What's upcoming? What are you excited about? Is there an obstacle you might need support with? And then I don't know, most of you are familiar, if you are giving feedback, using the sandwich approach, where you share something that you've observed them doing well, an area where you need them to do better, differently, and one more positive. So I also have some resources of like 20 great templates for one-to-ones. So if that doesn't quite jive with your role, I'd be happy to send you some other suggestions.
Thank you. And we have 2.5-ish more questions.
Okay.
They're separate questions, but they kind of tie
Okay.
into technology. So one person said they don't know where they stand on the DISC spectrum. So is there a good resource to test herself? But then tied into that question, just because of the technology aspect, do you recommend any tools or software to automate a meeting recap quickly to share with your team post-meeting?
Okay, great.
So I looped them together because they're both technology.
It's great. It's great. For DISC, you can't self-assess. I have a really great tool that I would be happy to offer to anyone here. And so it's another Cincinnati-based organization. It's a software platform that actually allows you to use multiple assessments. So I'm happy to talk with folks offline about that. I'm kind of a provider, meaning I can, and I'm certified in DISC, so I can do that assessment very quickly. It's like a 5 to 10 minute assessment, and it gives a great report, a solid report. So talk to me. I can make that available to you. Typically I use Zoom for all of my meetings. Even if you are in a in-person meeting, it's a little harder because it doesn't know that Elizabeth is speaking and then Emily is speaking. But if you use the built-in AI, it will summarize. You can actually get it to give you like a longer summary or a bulleted summary. So I would look at Teams has one. I think it's called Copilot. There's external summary tools that you can plug in. So again, I would just look at like what you might already have available to you and see, how well it works. Sometimes it, 80%, right? It might have 20% where it thought Elizabeth said that, but it was Emily. You can kind of go in and fix that pretty quickly. And then that other tool that I mentioned, I don't think I have it in front of me right now. But the technology is coming. It really is. And there's no longer going to be the need to type and capture notes. But look at what might already be built into some of the software that you are using.
Yeah, I think Zoom's might be Read AI. Maybe. I'm not sure. But okay, last question. And this one's a little specific, but it's interesting because it ties to Miami because I believe this person works on our Luxembourg campus.
Oh, okay.
So she said that her team speaks 2 languages and not everyone has a common language. They currently have 1 weekly meeting all together, but they need to do quick translations, which is not effective. Do you have any suggestions? And maybe it is one of these
Yeah.
you just mentioned.
Yeah, so I think that having kind of that proactive meeting that is, does everything have to be transcribed, right? Or what are the critical documents? What are the critical meetings? Do we have to transcribe the whole conversation, or could we use an AI tool to say, here are the key takeaways, and then we put that into Google Translate or whatever it may be, to create the bilingual interpretation. Um, and I think that depending, maybe sharing ownership there, it's not one person's job to have to always do the converting. And then I think the other thought here is making sure that you're asking language preference, right? Don't just assume that the individual who represents Luxembourg always needs that their preference is in, something other than English. So I would look at certainly how can you use the transcription type AI tools. Can it convert it for you? Can it condense the information? And then again, collectively as a team, making sure that we're not just transcribing and translating everything, but the most critical factors or takeaways or conversation points. That is a unique one, though.
It is. It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Elisabeth. Is there anything last minute you want to share before I close us out?
No, I just, take a couple of those ideas from today and, I would challenge you to say next week, pick one thing that you're going to do differently in your email communication or in the meetings that you run, and just be curious and see how it might make a change for you and others.
Great. Well, thank you so much for today. I think it was helpful to all of us. I had a lot of people were writing in saying like, thank you, this is great. This is so positive. So I really appreciate it.
Great.
And thank you to all of you who tuned in and participated and asked questions. We appreciate you. Just a reminder that you can sign up for all of our webinars and watch any of our previously recorded ones for free at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. So I hope that you will join us in some of our future ones as well. And with that, enjoy your afternoon and love and honor.